The Nigeria Center for Disease Control is the sole authority in testing for COVID-19 in the country. But health experts are saying that Nigeria's testing capability has not been up to scratch when put side by side with her population and the rate of the community spread of COVID-19, particularly within the identified hotspots of Lagos, Kano, and Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Some private laboratories like 54Gene have also been carrying out tests, but even at that, the country's capacity still fluctuates between 3,000 and 5,000 a day. Just how much push would the increased involvement of private laboratories give to the effort to arrest the community spread of COVID-19? We will now try to get answers by speaking with Dr. Olayemi Dawodu, an anatomical and molecular pathologist. She is the Managing Director and Chief Executive of Clina-Lancet Laboratories, a holder of an MBBS from College of Medicine, University of Lagos. Dr. Dawodu is also a fellow in pathology and laboratory medicine of the National Postgraduate Medical College of Nigeria and the West African College of Physicians. Welcome to the program. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning, Dr. Dawodu. Well, one of the major issues we have had to deal with on this program is the conflict, if you like, the disagreement between the federal government and private medical practitioners, particularly with regard to the management of the COVID-19 challenge that everyone faces around the world. And the issue has been the role of private medical practitioners and particularly also laboratories. Now, what's your view about this? The federal government says it has up to 29 molecular laboratories for COVID-19 testing at the moment. Is there a role for owners of private laboratories? And has there been any attempt on the part of the Presidential Task Force to reach out and engage, private molecular pathologists?
Morning again.
Good morning.
Thank you for the question. Yes, in terms of current status of the testing in Nigeria, there are 29 molecular pathology labs that are testing currently, and interestingly, part of that network includes private sector. What happened was about, I think, April, the NCDC came up with a framework, and one of the prongs of the framework was to include the private sector in testing. And this, they communicated, I think it was about middle of April. On the 15th of May this year, they then went further to also release another document on how they would onboard the private sector with guidelines on how they will be included. Now, quite interesting, as of yesterday, 1st of June, they've also now brought out a 13-point principle of including the private sector in testing for COVID-19 currently, of which I can tell you that quite a number of private sector laboratories will meet up with that criteria, which would also help in ramping up the testing, because as you correctly said, we are really not up to par when you look at what our population says and the amount of tests that have been done. We haven't even done up to 80,000 tests as at yesterday night.
Wow, that is far below the projected 2 million tests in 3 months. 3 months being from April to June. So 80,000 falls way short of the mark. Hopefully, when you are accredited, more private labs are accredited, we can close that huge gap that we're facing now. But let's talk about the accreditation process, because that's important. There have been all kinds of reports where tests are concerned, and it varies widely in price, in efficacy, in the process. Can you tell us more about that, and what are the efforts being made to harmonize so that you know and you can be sure if you are declared negative, you are in fact negative. If you are declared positive, you are in fact positive.
So that's one of the things that are included in the prongs. You have to have a very robust quality management system in place in any of the laboratories that will be taking up for the testing. And this is very important in, like what you said, it is what validates that when you say something is positive, and when you say something is negative. It must be part of the processes that are ingrained in your laboratory practice and operations. And another thing that I noticed that they placed a lot of emphasis on is accreditation. We, at my laboratory in Clina-Lancet, are accredited to ISO 15189. And what that says to you is that you have the world international best practice in carrying out clinical pathology, molecular testing within that lab. So another thing to also state is that there are different types of tests. I'm sure we've heard about the PCR test. We've heard about the rapid diagnostic test, where you have the antigen and antibody testing. But the gold standard that has been instituted and that is backed by the World Health Organization is the reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction test, which is said to be the gold standard for carrying out COVID-19 testing. All the other ones haven't, I don't know any rapid diagnostic tests that has been fully validated by the WHO. What that says is that if you embark on carrying out your testing by any of these rapid tests, you can have a lot of false positives and false negatives, but you have a reduced risk of getting this kind of results when you use the PCR, which is quite a bit of a complex process as well that identifies the virus itself.
Certainly, Dr. Dawodu, the PCR test is the global standard test that's being used around the world right now. But the issue with the PCR test that a lot of private facilities in particular are also finding, and maybe you can comment on this, is the fact that it's scarce right now. So it's not really something that you have much access to. And this is why a lot of governments have decided to independently embark on using their own rapid diagnostic test kits, etc. Do you think we can afford to wait here in Nigeria for validation from the WHO with regards to other test kits, because our testing capacity is really low, like you said, 80,000?
Well, in that regards, I would still say you have to follow the science. I don't think that we should rush to say, because what that does is it gives false confidence. If you tell somebody where they've missed out that the person is positive, that they are negative, there's a problem with that. Or you tell somebody that is negative, that they are positive, there's a problem with that as well. So I would still say that I wouldn't think that we should embark on using rapid diagnostic tests at this stage in the process of testing for COVID-19. And I do agree with you. It's not just in Nigeria. It's across board that we have issues with supply chain in terms of the consumables and the reagents. So there are a lot of labs currently that have the platforms. But part of the issue is the consumable or the test kits that you need to run COVID-19. We do have to put in mind that this is a novel virus. It's a new one. So nobody prior to probably January or February were really preparing or manufacturing COVID-19 reagents, if that makes sense.
Well, still on the issue of testing, I mean, the Presidential Task Force has had to make comments and compare what is happening in Nigeria with what is happening in Ghana. In Ghana, for example, they have rapid testing. And here in Nigeria, we're told that what we're doing is smart testing, what you call PCR testing. But we've also been told recently that rapid testing kits are available on the black market in Nigeria. And, you know, is it something that somebody can just buy like that off the shelf? And then what's your assessment of what we have done so far with testing? Our capacity, we're told, is just a little over 60,000. With a population of 200 million people, do we need to do something else to make sure that we achieve the target of 2 million in 3 months that has been promised? Obviously, we can't meet that target. So what else do we need to do?
I think in terms of what needs to be done, I will say I think they've currently embarked on what needs to be done in terms of including the private sector that has the capacity to help to augment the numbers of tests that are being done. I must say that I would like to encourage the authorities to increase the process, to increase their activities around the accreditation, like you correctly said. It's still rather slow. I think we need to be more coordinated in moving around those facilities that have actually shown interest in testing in the private sector so that they get onboarded quickly. That would also add to the number of tests that are being done daily.
So with the limitations that you've explained with regards to diagnostic testing, what do you think of antibody testing? Because people who have tested positive for COVID-19, or pardon me, they were positive for COVID-19, they suffered from the disease but had mild symptoms, so never got a formal diagnosis, will have certain antibodies. People who were asymptomatic and so never got tested and therefore were never formally diagnosed will also have antibodies. That could also help us get a handle on the situation. What do you think of that?
So in terms of use of antibody testing, I think you start to use that in the stage. For example, I mean, I feel we didn't have to release the lockdown the way we did, with the way the numbers are ramping up. But now, fine, that has been done. That might be an area where antibody testing comes in. For you to be able to sift out those people that, as you said, were asymptomatic and didn't have any tests done, to see if they have any antibodies against the COVID-19 virus. So in doing this, then you're able to comfortably release these people to, whether it's get back to work or to go back into society, because you know they've already been infected. And currently what we know is that there's no strong backing scientifically that if you've been infected, that you can be reinfected. I think that is where we play a key role. Take, for instance, even schools. Children going back to schools and all that. I think those are the areas where you probably might be able to use that effectively to know the people that you can ease back with comfort into society.
Certainly. I mean, to be honest with you, it seems like that may be the only option left if we are going to take a blind survival of the fittest approach to things. But like with the PCR tests, sorry, like with the rapid test kits that we've just been speaking about, is there any way in which you can also get false positives, or is it very possible for you to get false positives when doing antibodies tests or serology tests?
Absolutely. You can, because coronavirus is a large group of viruses, and they might have to, they are cross, you can have what's the word? They belong to the same family, so you may pick up something that is not COVID-19 as a positive when it is not an infection from COVID-19.
Well, Dr. Dawodu, we'll take a short commercial break now. Please stay with us. When we return, the conversation will continue. It's still The Morning Show.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. We're still with Dr. Olayemi Dawodu, Managing Director and CEO of Clina-Lancet Laboratories. So, Dr. Dawodu, you referred earlier to your ISO certification, Clina-Lancet. But can you take us through NCDC's accreditation process? How much weight does an ISO certification carry? Does that make you automatically accredited by NCDC? Do they have to visit the facilities? What kind of upgrade is necessary? Because I'm sure the public wants to know what is taking so long to get this accreditation that we desperately need, such that samples do not need to be sent to other states for testing.
Thank you very much for the question, Tudu. So in terms of ISO accreditation, well, I would say yes. It gives you the, it lets you know that the lab has an audited and internationally acceptable quality management system in place. I would also like to say that the NCDC also has their guidelines, which I mentioned is inclusive of accreditation. It's inclusive of trained personnel that will run the test. I think there's a portion about proficiency testing, which is one of the portions you have under a quality management system in an accredited lab. It also has to do with the platform that will be used. And in terms of registration, the laboratory has to be registered by the bodies that are responsible for registering diagnostic pathology laboratories. Part of the things that are required by the NCDC is also that you have to have them come in and assess the layout of the laboratory that will be used. Apart from that, you have to have your machine that will carry out the test validated by the NCDC. I think one of the things causing the slowness is because the teams that are accredited to carry out this assessment are just from the NCDC. and they are probably being pulled in a lot of directions so that they have to be in different states at different times to do this accreditation. So part of what you have to have is that you're accredited by the bodies within the country and the state. You have a quality management system. You have a PCR suite that is set out with the recommendations, world best practices of world best laboratory practices. The layout has to be correct. They have to validate the machine that the test will be carried out on. I think one of the things they've also proposed that is good, because we're speaking about supply chain, is that they've embarked on, or they've put their weight behind supplying the reagents for you to carry out those tests on your machines when you're within the NCDC network.
So in terms of recommendations to governments, in terms of making this an easier process so that we can get more labs accredited, what recommendations would you give?
I believe that the government needs to be more coordinated in terms of the deployment of the teams that have to move around to have a quicker response time to onboarding of the laboratories that need to be brought into the network. I think we just have, as of now, 4 private private pathology laboratories that have been onboarded, which is still pretty small, because when you look at the true capacity of laboratories in the private sector that we have across the country, it's quite significant. We need to ramp it up and move around quickly to get them accredited and included in the network.
Well, I would like to move away slightly from the subject of laboratories. One of the major indications that we have had is that many private hospitals are beginning to turn away patients. And that, we're told, is responsible for the spike in the fatality rates and also a problem for the management of the COVID-19 pandemic. What do you think could be responsible for private hospitals refusing to attend to patients, even patients that are not expressly presenting, indications of COVID-19? And what can be done about that, if it is true?
Thank you for the question. I will admit that obviously there's a lot of anxiety amongst private clinicians that have private hospitals, and you can't blame anyone. If you're not able to decipher if somebody is infected and they come into your facility, albeit when you're not prepared, then you know what the ramifications are for that particular facility. I must admit that a lot of private hospitals have actually increased their safety measures, temperature checks, use of masks, and all those things. But that being said, I believe that they would also like to have some sort of comfort to know for sure that those that are being admitted into the hospital are actually free of the virus.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, because more or less, if you don't know, it's only by testing that you would know if somebody's infected or not.
So that leads me to my next question. There was an experiment that was conducted in a village in Italy called VO, and it really just showed the importance of mass testing. Obviously, we might not be able to achieve that here, but when we go back to the NCDC's target of 2 million tests, how should it be targeted for the, ultimate or efficiency?
So, like I said earlier as well, there has to be increase in the capacity of those that can test, and it must be coordinated. Most especially, we must note that in a pandemic, emphasis and the most important group are those that are symptomatic. That is not to say that you're not going to carry out tests on those that may not have symptoms, but it has to be coordinated in that way, with emphasis on those that are symptomatic, and also looking for a way to look at maybe grouping people in terms of the importance of how they have to be assimilated back into society, and embarking on testing by those batches.
Yeah, so it's not just random. Thank you.
Yes.
Certainly. And I wanted to ask you, because many scientists and specialists around the world now are coming out to analyze Africa's situation in a different way. And lots of scientists are saying that what we're seeing in Africa is lower viral loads. Now, a study was also carried out in Genoa recently where they took a COVID patient from 2 months ago and a COVID patient from a week ago, and the viral load was actually lower. Do you think that there is a lower viral load, and that is the issue that we're seeing here, or would you attribute attribute it to something else?
So I probably might not be talking about lower viral load for Africa and Nigeria as well. What you have to note is that in places like Italy, they have an older, a more elderly generation. People live longer. And we know that in that age group, you have a lot of comorbidities. We know that advanced age affects how the person responds to the virus. If you look at Africa, Africa has a largely younger population across Africa. And I think that that is also part of what we're seeing in terms of how the virus is affecting the population. That's what I attribute it to.
Well, you are a scientist, and I'm sure you must have been following developments with regard to COVID-19.
Yeah.
Is there any word of comfort that science can offer us at this, moment? Would this COVID-19 at some point go away, or we're just doomed to adjusting to what everybody has been calling the new normal? And that new normal looks like, a transformation of our lives the way we know it. Is there any hope?
Well, I'd say there's hope. What do I mean by that? We all know that it's a new virus. The information about the virus is evolving daily as we go by. I think what we can look forward to is like what every other scientist has spoken about, is about getting therapy or finding a vaccine. I think until we arrive at that, we will definitely have to modify the way we're living currently.
And yet you're slightly concerned about the relaxing of restrictions. You mentioned that earlier. Would you care to expand on that, and what would you have preferred to see?
I still think that, like what we spoke about earlier, ramping up of testing would have been important in my opinion, and like I stated, in phases or tiers in allowing people back into society. But the other presenter mentioned something earlier, that it seems like we're being released for survival of the fittest, because that's what it seems like to me. The numbers haven't gone down, the numbers are ramping up by the day, and we just seem to have relaxed. You go around and you see there was recommendation for people to wear face masks. I passed through a market and I see there's no enforcement. People are actually going about like nothing is really going on in a lot of places.
Well, you are quite right. Maybe the strategy is that of herd immunity. Thank you very much, Dr. Dawodu, for joining us this morning on The Morning Show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.